The gunshot that killed Elijah Young's uncle echoed across the Rio Grande on a scorching August afternoon in 1878. And though Elijah was only 8 years old at the time, he never forgot the way his father's face turned to stone when they pulled the body from the water. The Caldwell ranch sat on the opposite bank, and everyone knew Thomas Caldwell had pulled the trigger, though no lawman would cross into his territory to prove it. That was the day the blood feud began, when Marcus Young swore on his brother's grave that no Caldwell would ever set foot on Young land again, and that his family would have their reckoning. 16 years later, Elijah sat on his horse at the edge of the Rio Grande, staring across the churning water at the Caldwell property that stretched into the Texas horizon. The river marked more than a boundary between two ranches. It was a line drawn in blood, a barrier his father had commanded him never to cross. But Elijah's hands gripped the reins so tightly, his knuckles had gone white, because on the other side of that river was Josephine Caldwell, and she was the only thing in this world that could make him break his father's sacred rule. He had first seen her 3 months earlier at the general store in Lusk, Wyoming, where both families occasionally traveled for supplies. They could not get closer to home. The town sat neutral territory, far enough north that neither ranch claimed dominion over it, though an unspoken rule kept the families from shopping on the same days. But Elijah had been running late that morning. His father's prize mare had thrown a shoe, and by the time he reached Henderson's general store, Josephine Caldwell was standing at the counter, haggling over the price of fabric with old Mrs. Henderson. Elijah had frozen in the doorway, recognizing her immediately from the dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and the proud way she held herself, exactly like her father. He should have turned and walked out. His father would have demanded it. But then Josephine had glanced over her shoulder, and their eyes met, and Elijah felt something shift inside his chest like the ground giving way beneath his feet. She had looked at him with the same startled recognition, her brown eyes widening, one hand going to her throat. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The store seemed to fall silent around them, though Mrs. Henderson kept chattering about thread counts and quality cotton. "You are Marcus Young's son," Josephine had said, and it was not a question. "Yes, madam," Elijah replied, removing his hat. "And you are Thomas Caldwell's daughter." "I am." They should have left it at that. They should have conducted their business in cold silence and departed, maintaining the feud that had defined both their lives. Instead, Josephine had smiled, just a small curve of her lips, and said, "Mrs. Henderson, I believe this gentleman was here first. I can wait." "Nonsense," Elijah had heard himself say. "Ladies should always be served first. I am in no hurry." That was how it began, with a small courtesy, a tiny rebellion against the hatred their fathers nurtured like a poisonous crop. Over the next weeks, Elijah found reasons to visit Lusk more often, always timing his arrivals for early morning when he might accidentally encounter Josephine. They began to talk, carefully at first, about nothing important: the weather, the cattle, the way the cottonwoods were turning gold earlier than usual that year. But conversations have a way of deepening when two people want them to, and soon they were meeting deliberately, taking walks along the creek that ran behind the town, sitting on the old stone bridge while their horses grazed nearby. Josephine told him about her mother, who had died when she was 12, leaving her to run the Caldwell household and raise her 2 younger brothers. Elijah told her about his dreams of breeding horses, of building something beyond the endless cycle of anger and revenge. "My father speaks of your family every day," Josephine had confessed one morning in July, her voice barely above a whisper. "He has taught my brothers to hate the Youngs before they even understood why. Mine does the same, Elijah admitted. I've lived my whole life knowing the Caldwells as enemies, yet I cannot make myself hate you, Josephine. Lord knows I have tried. She had looked at him then with such intensity that he felt his breath catch. I am glad you failed, she said. That was the day he kissed her, there on the stone bridge with the creek babbling below and the July sun beating down on them. That was the day Elijah Young understood he would cross any river, break any oath, defy any feud for Josephine Caldwell, but their secret meetings could not last forever. 2 weeks ago, one of Thomas Caldwell's ranch hands had spotted them riding together on the outskirts of Lusk. The man had ridden straight back to the Caldwell ranch and reported what he had seen. That night, Thomas had locked Josephine in her room and declared that she would not leave the property again until she came to her senses. He had posted men around the house, and word had reached Elijah through a sympathetic shopkeeper that Josephine was essentially a prisoner. Elijah had spent those 2 weeks in agony, unable to see her, unable to know if she was well. He had tried to focus on his work, on the horses that needed training and the fences that needed mending. But every night he lay awake, thinking of Josephine trapped in that house, surrounded by people who would never understand what they meant to each other. Yesterday, a letter had arrived, smuggled to him by a young Mexican boy who worked in the Caldwell stables. Josephine's handwriting was elegant but rushed. Elijah, my father plans to send me to my aunt in San Antonio at the end of the week. He says I need to be away from bad influences to remember my family duty. If you want to see me again, it must be soon. I will be in the east pasture tomorrow at sunset. There is an old cottonwood by the river. Please come, please. So now Elijah sat on his horse, watching the Rio Grande flow past, knowing that the moment he crossed that water, there would be no going back. His father would disown him. The ranch hands who had known him since childhood would look at him with disgust. The life he had always known would be over, but Josephine was on the other side of that river and she was worth it. She was worth everything. Elijah urged his horse forward and they plunged into the current. The Rio Grande ran fast in late August, swollen from storms upriver, and the crossing was harder than he had anticipated. His horse struggled against the current, water rising to Elijah's knees, then his waist. For a moment, he thought they might be swept downstream, but the horse found purchase on the rocky bottom and surged forward, lunging up the opposite bank with water streaming from them both. Elijah did not pause to catch his breath. He knew Caldwell land now, knew he was trespassing on enemy territory. If Thomas's men found him, there would be shooting first and questions never. He kicked his horse into a gallop, heading east toward where the letter had said the old cottonwood stood. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and crimson. Elijah's heart hammered in his chest as he rode, scanning the landscape for any sign of ranch hands or patrols. The east pasture opened before him, and there, silhouetted against the sunset, was the massive cottonwood Josephine had described, its branches spreading wide like welcoming arms, and beneath it, holding the reins of a paint horse, was Josephine. She saw him coming and dropped the reins, running toward him across the grass. Elijah swung down from his horse before it had fully stopped, and then Josephine was in his arms, and he was holding her so tightly he could feel her heartbeat against his chest. "You came," she whispered into his shoulder. "I was afraid you would not. I was afraid you would think it too dangerous. Nothing could have kept me away." Elijah pulled back just enough to look at her face, drinking in the sight of her. 2 weeks had felt like 2 years. "Are you all right? Did your father hurt you?" "No, he just kept me locked up like a wayward child." Josephine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. But Elijah, he means what he said. The stage to San Antonio leaves Friday morning, and he will have me on it. Once I am at my aunt's house, I will never get away. She is stricter than my father, and she lives in the city. I will never see you again. Then do not go. The words came out before Elijah had fully formed the thought, but once he spoke them, he knew they were right. Come with me instead, now, tonight. Josephine stared at him. Where would we go? North. To Lusk, Wyoming first, and then farther if we need to. I have money saved. We can get married there, start a life somewhere our father's hatred cannot reach us. Elijah took her hands in his, feeling them tremble. I know what I am asking, Josephine. I know you would be leaving your family, your home. But I love you. I have loved you since that first day in Henderson's store, and I cannot let you disappear to San Antonio without telling you that if you come with me, I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret it. The tears spilled over now, running down Josephine's cheeks. I love you too, she said. I have been so miserable these past 2 weeks, trapped in that house, knowing my father was planning to separate us forever. I prayed you would find a way to reach me, but I never imagined, she broke off, looking back toward the distant ranch house. If we do this, my father will never forgive me. He will hunt us. Let him try. Elijah cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. We will stay ahead of him. And maybe, someday, when enough time has passed, both our fathers will see that this feud has cost them enough, that losing their children might finally make them realize how pointless all this hatred has been. You do not know my father, Josephine said quietly. His anger runs deep. This feud is everything to him. Then we will deal with that when the time comes. But right now, Josephine, I need to know, will you come with me? Will you take this chance with me? She looked at him for a long moment, her brown eyes searching his face. Then she nodded, quick and decisive. Yes, yes, I will come with you. Relief flooded through Elijah so powerfully he felt dizzy. He kissed her, tasting salt from her tears, feeling her hands grip the front of his shirt like she was anchoring herself to him. When they broke apart, the sun had dropped another few degrees toward the horizon. We need to go now, Elijah said, before anyone notices you are gone. I need to get a few things from the house, Josephine said. Some clothes, money if I can access the household funds. Too dangerous. If anyone sees you, this is over. I know, but I have a plan. Josephine's jaw set in determination. My father and brothers rode out to the South Range this morning to deal with some fence cutters. They will not be back until after dark. The house is only watched by old Javier, and he takes his supper in the kitchen around this time. I can slip in through my window. I have done it before. Give me 20 minutes. Elijah did not like it, but he understood. They would need supplies for the journey north, and whatever Josephine could gather would help. 20 minutes, he agreed. I will wait here with the horses. If you are not back by then, I am coming to find you. I will be back. She kissed him once more, quick and fierce, then mounted her paint horse and rode toward the distant ranch house. Elijah watched her go, anxiety tightening his gut. He led both horses into the shadow of the cottonwood and tried to calm his racing thoughts. They were really doing this. They were running away together, abandoning everything they had ever known. Part of him wanted to feel guilty about defying his father so completely, but mostly he just felt alive in a way he never had before. The minutes crawled past. Elijah counted them by the descent of the sun, watching the sky deepen from orange to red to purple. 15 minutes. 18. 20. No sign of Josephine. 22 minutes. 25. Elijah was about to mount his horse and ride after her when he heard hoofbeats. He spun, hand dropping to the pistol at his hip, but then he saw Josephine galloping across the pasture, a canvas bag bouncing against her horse's flank. Behind her, much farther back but closing fast, were 3 riders. "Ride," Josephine shouted as she reached him. "Javier saw me. He sent for my father." Elijah was already swinging into his saddle. They kicked their horses into a gallop, racing back toward the river with the pursuing riders gaining ground. Elijah could hear shouts now, angry voices calling for Josephine to stop. He glanced back and saw the riders more clearly, ranch hands by their dress, and they were armed. "Stop, Miss Josephine," one of them bellowed. "Your father's orders. Keep going," Elijah urged, leaning low over his horse's neck. The Rio Grande appeared ahead of them, dark water flowing swift and treacherous in the failing light. They hit the river at full speed, and the horses plunged in, struggling immediately against the current. The water was even higher than before, and the current pulled at them viciously. Elijah's horse stumbled, went under for a heart-stopping moment, then surfaced, swimming hard for the opposite bank. Beside him, Josephine's paint horse was doing better, its powerful legs churning through the water. Josephine clung to its mane, her face set with determination. Behind them, the ranch hands had reached the riverbank but had not entered the water. They sat on their horses, watching as Elijah and Josephine struggled across. Then one of them raised a rifle. "Get down," Elijah shouted, but the shot went wide, splashing into the water several feet away. The ranch hand was not trying to hit them, he was trying to scare the horses. But the horses did not need more fear. They were already terrified by the raging current. Elijah's horse found the bottom and lunged up the young side of the river, water cascading from them both. Josephine's paint followed seconds later, and they were across, dripping and gasping but safe on young territory. The ranch hands across the river shouted more threats, but they did not cross. They would not dare, not onto Marcus Young's land. But one of them wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward the Caldwell ranch house, clearly going to alert Thomas that his daughter had fled. "We have to move," Elijah said, his voice urgent. "My father will know something is wrong the moment he hears about Caldwell men at the river. We need to be miles from here before that happens." They rode hard through the gathering darkness, heading north toward Lusk, Wyoming. Josephine's bag, miraculously, had stayed mostly dry, protected by the oilcloth she had wrapped around it. They did not stop to check what she had managed to grab, just kept riding, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the ranches that had been their whole world. The moon rose, nearly full, providing enough light to navigate by. Elijah led them along trails he knew from years of ranging across young land, paths that would not be easily followed. They stopped once to rest the horses and drink from a stream, but neither of them had any appetite, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. "There is no turning back now," Josephine said quietly as they sat beside the stream. "They all saw me leaving with you. My father will know I chose this." "Do you regret it?" Elijah asked, though he was afraid of the answer. "No." She turned to him, and even in the moonlight, he could see the certainty in her eyes. "I am terrified of what comes next, but I do not regret this. I would rather face an uncertain future with you than a certain future locked in my aunt's house, withering away and wondering what might have been." Elijah took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I will take care of you, Josephine, I swear it. I know you will." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We will take care of each other." They rode through the night, stopping only when the horses were too exhausted to continue. As dawn broke over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they finally allowed themselves to rest, sheltering in a small canyon where they could not easily be spotted from a distance. Josephine opened her bag and inventoried what she had managed to grab. 3 dresses, a change of underclothings, a thick wool shawl, a small pouch of coins that she estimated contained about $30, and a tintype photograph of her mother. It was not much, but it was something. "I have about $70 saved," Elijah said. "It is enough to get us to Lusk and keep us fed for a few weeks while we figure out our next steps. I can find work. I am good with horses, and ranchers always need hands." "I can cook and sew," Josephine offered. "Perhaps I can find work too. We will manage, Elijah. We have to." They slept in shifts, one of them always awake to watch for pursuit. But no one came. The day passed slowly, the heat building as the sun climbed higher. They rationed their water carefully, knowing they still had a long ride ahead of them. As evening approached, they set out again, riding through the night once more. By the time dawn broke on their second day away from the ranches, they could see the buildings of Lusk, Wyoming, in the distance. The town had never looked so welcoming. They rode in slowly, exhausted and filthy, drawing curious stares from the early rising shopkeepers and townspeople. Elijah led them directly to the church, a small wooden structure with a white steeple that stood at the end of Main Street. Reverend Thomas Whitmore was sweeping the steps when they arrived. He was an older man, his beard more white than gray, with kind eyes that had seen a lot of hardship in his years ministering to the Wyoming frontier. "Reverend Whitmore," Elijah said, dismounting stiffly, "we need your help." The Reverend looked at them, taking in their travel-stained clothes and exhausted faces. "You are Marcus' young son," he said slowly, "and unless I am mistaken, you are Thomas Caldwell's daughter." "Yes, sir," Josephine said, "and we would like you to marry us if you are willing." Reverend Whitmore's eyebrows rose. "Does your father know you are here, Miss Caldwell?" "No, sir, and he would not approve if he did. But I am 21 years old, and I can make my own choices about who I marry." Josephine's voice was steady, though Elijah could see her hands shaking slightly. "I am 24, Elijah added. "We are both of legal age and we love each other. We know our families will not understand, but we are asking you to help us anyway." The Reverend was quiet for a long moment, studying them both. Then he sighed and set his broom aside. "I have known about the feud between your families for years. It has always seemed to me a particularly pointless bit of hatred, especially since no one can quite agree on who wronged whom first." He gestured toward the church doors. "Come inside. Let me hear your story, and then we will see about getting you married." They sat in the front pew of the empty church, and Elijah told the Reverend everything: how they had met, how they had fallen in love despite the feud, how Thomas Caldwell had planned to send Josephine away, and how they had fled together across the Rio Grande. Josephine added details he missed, describing her father's increasing paranoia and anger, the way he had isolated her from anyone who might encourage her independence. When they finished, Reverend Whitmore sat quietly for a moment, his hands folded in his lap. "What you are asking me to do will cause significant trouble," he said finally. "Both your fathers will be furious, and they may well turn their anger on me." "We understand that, sir," Elijah said. "And if you feel you cannot help us, we will find another way. But you are a good man, and we thought perhaps you might see that what we are doing is trying to end a cycle of hatred, not perpetuate it. Do you truly believe your marriage will end the feud?" The Reverend's voice was gentle but skeptical. "No," Josephine said honestly. "At least, not immediately. But perhaps someday, when our fathers have had time to realize what their hatred has cost them, they might be willing to make peace. And even if they never do, at least Elijah and I will have broken free of it. We will not pass that poison on to our children." Reverend Whitmore smiled at that. "Your children. You are already thinking ahead, I see." He stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "Very well. I will marry you, God knows this territory could use more love and less hatred, but I insist you wait until this evening. You both need rest, food, and proper wedding clothes. I will not have it said that I married Marcus Young's son and Thomas Caldwell's daughter like a pair of vagabonds in the night. Relief washed over Elijah so powerfully he felt tears prick his eyes. Thank you, Reverend. You cannot know what this means to us. I think I have some idea. The Reverend ushered them toward the door. My wife and I have rooms behind the church. You can wash up there and rest. Sarah will find something suitable for Miss Caldwell to wear, and I believe I have a clean shirt that will fit you, son. We will hold the ceremony at sunset. That should give you time to prepare yourselves properly. Sarah Whitmore turned out to be as kind as her husband, a plump woman with a warm smile who clucked over Josephine like a mother hen, insisting she eat a proper breakfast and take a hot bath. She produced a pale blue dress that had belonged to her daughter before the young woman married and moved to Denver, and though it was slightly too big for Josephine, she pinned it expertly to fit. You are a beautiful bride, Sarah said, arranging Josephine's dark hair with practiced hands. Even under these difficult circumstances, you should look your best on your wedding day. Josephine looked at herself in the small mirror Sarah provided. The blue dress brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair, cleaned and brushed, fell in glossy waves down her back. She did look like a bride, and the reality of what was about to happen hit her all at once. In a few hours, she would be married to Elijah Young. She would be Josephine Young, no longer a Caldwell. She would belong to a new family, even if that family was just the two of them against the world. Are you all right, dear? Sarah asked gently. Yes, Josephine said, and was surprised to find it was true. I am more than all right. I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Evening came with a spectacular sunset, the sky ablaze with color visible through the church's small windows. Reverend Whitmore stood at the altar, his Bible open in his hands. Sarah sat in the front pew, ready to serve as witness, and Elijah waited at the altar in a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair combed back and his face shining with happiness. Josephine walked down the short aisle alone, with no father to give her away, and she was glad of it. She gave herself away, freely and willingly, to the man she loved. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. They spoke the traditional vows, their voices steady despite the enormity of what they were doing. When Reverend Whitmore pronounced them man and wife, Elijah kissed her with such tenderness that Josephine felt tears slip down her cheeks. I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Elijah Young, the Reverend said, smiling. May God bless your union and keep you safe in the days ahead. They signed the marriage certificate, Sarah and the Reverend adding their signatures as witnesses. It was official, legal, binding. Whatever happened next, Josephine and Elijah were bound together, and no one could separate them. The Whitmores insisted they stay for dinner, a celebratory meal of roasted chicken and fresh vegetables from Sarah's garden. They talked and laughed, and for a few hours, Josephine allowed herself to forget about angry fathers and blood feuds and just enjoy being a new bride. But eventually, the evening had to end. The Whitmores offered them the use of a small room in the church basement, a space usually reserved for traveling preachers but clean and private. It was not much of a honeymoon suite, but Josephine did not care. She lay in Elijah's arms that night, listening to his heartbeat, and felt more at home than she ever had in the grand Caldwell Ranch house. What do we do now? She whispered into the darkness. We live, Elijah said simply. We find work, we build a life. We prove that choosing love over hatred was the right decision. It will not be easy, no, but nothing worthwhile ever is. He kissed the top of her head. Sleep, Josephine. Tomorrow we start our new life together. They spent the next 3 days in Lusk, Wyoming, looking for work and a place to stay. Elijah found employment quickly at a ranch north of town, owned by a man named Daniel Forrester, who needed someone to help train his young horses. When Forrester learned that Elijah's wife could cook and keep house, he offered them both jobs and a small cabin on his property. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a loft, with a stone fireplace and windows that did not quite close all the way, but it was theirs. For the first time in their lives, Josephine and Elijah had a home that belonged to them, not to their families, not to the feud, just them. They settled into a rhythm quickly. Elijah worked with the horses from dawn until dusk, while Josephine kept the cabin clean and prepared meals. In the evenings, they would sit together on the small porch, watching the sun set over the Wyoming plains, talking about their hopes for the future. "I want children," Josephine said one evening about 2 weeks after their wedding. "At least 3, maybe 4. "That seems ambitious," Elijah teased, but his eyes were warm. "You already have names picked out, perhaps a few." She leaned against his shoulder. "I want them to grow up knowing only love, Elijah. No feuds, no hatred passed down through generations, just a family that cares for each other." "We will give them that," Elijah promised. "Whatever else happens, we will make sure our children know love." But the peace they had found in Lusk could not last forever. 1 month after their wedding, Marcus Young and Thomas Caldwell arrived in town. Elijah was in the barn, working with a particularly stubborn mare, when Daniel Forrester came running across the yard. "Elijah, there are men here looking for you and your wife. They say they are your fathers." Elijah's blood ran cold. He dropped the lead rope and ran toward the cabin, his heart pounding. Josephine was inside preparing bread for the evening meal. He burst through the door, startling her. "They are here," he said. "Our fathers, both of them." Josephine's face went white. "Are you certain?" "Forrester just told me. They are in town looking for us." For a moment, Josephine looked like she might faint. Then her jaw set in the same determined expression Elijah had come to love. "Then we face them, together." They rode into town side by side, their hands clasped tightly together. A small crowd had gathered outside Henderson's general store, and Elijah spotted his father immediately. Marcus Young stood in the street, his face carved from granite, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Beside him, looking equally furious, was Thomas Caldwell. The 2 men who had sworn eternal hatred for each other now stood united in their anger at their children. Elijah and Josephine dismounted, and Elijah stepped slightly in front of his wife, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by either father. "So it is true," Marcus said, his voice cold. "My son ran off with a Caldwell." "Your daughter ran off with a Young," Thomas spat at Josephine. "After everything I have done for you, after all the warnings I gave you about that family, you betray me like this." "We have not betrayed anyone," Elijah said, keeping his voice steady. "We fell in love. That is not a betrayal." "Love," Marcus laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You think love matters when the man's family murdered your uncle. When they have stolen from us, lied about us, tried to run us off our land. And your family has done the same to mine," Thomas shot back, though his anger was still directed at Josephine. "The Youngs have been a plague on the Caldwells for 16 years. And now my own daughter has married into that den of snakes." "We are married," Josephine said, her voice ringing clear across the street. The crowd had grown larger, townspeople drawn by the confrontation. "Reverend Whitmore married us a month ago. It is legal and binding, and there is nothing either of you can do to change that." "We can have it annulled," Thomas said. "You are my daughter. You live under my authority." "I am 21 years old," Josephine replied. "I am a married woman. I no longer live under your authority, Father. I live under my own. Thomas's face flushed red with rage. You ungrateful, that is enough. Reverend Whitmore's voice cut through the tension as he stepped out of the crowd. Thomas, Marcus, this is a public street and you are frightening people. If you want to have this conversation, you will do it civilly, or you will leave my town. This is not your concern, Reverend, Marcus said. It became my concern when I married these two young people, Whitmore replied calmly. And I will tell you what I told them: this feud of yours is a poison, and it has gone on long enough. Your children have chosen love over hatred. You should be proud of them, not threatening them in the street. Proud. Thomas's voice was incredulous. My daughter has disgraced herself and my family. She will return to the ranch with me immediately. I will not, Josephine said. I am staying with my husband. Then you are no daughter of mine. Thomas's words fell like stones. You are dead to me, Josephine. Do you understand? Dead. I have no daughter anymore. The pain in Josephine's eyes was visible, but she did not flinch. If that is how you feel, then so be it, but I will not apologize for choosing happiness over your hatred. Thomas stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked toward his horse. We are leaving, he said to Marcus. There is nothing here for us anymore. But Marcus did not move. He was looking at Elijah, really looking at him, and something complicated passed across his face. You gave up everything for her, he said quietly. Your home, your family, your inheritance. All for a Caldwell. No, sir, Elijah said. I gave it up for the woman I love, who happens to be named Josephine. She could have been from any family, and I would have made the same choice. Your uncle is dead and has been for 16 years, Elijah interrupted, and I mourn him. But I never knew him, Father. All I know is the hatred you have fed me my entire life, the bitterness that has consumed you. I will not let it consume me too. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he said, You are still my son, Elijah, but I cannot accept this. I cannot break bread with the Caldwells or welcome one into my family. If you stay with her, you choose her family over mine. I am not choosing her family over yours, Elijah said. I am choosing to build my own family, one that is not weighed down by old grudges and bloodshed. And I hope that someday you will be able to accept that. Marcus shook his head slowly. I do not think that day will ever come, son. I am sorry. He mounted his horse and rode after Thomas Caldwell, the two men leaving town together, united in their anger and loss. The crowd dispersed slowly, people returning to their business with much to gossip about. Josephine stood trembling in the street, and Elijah wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried silent tears for the father who had disowned her. We did the right thing, he whispered into her hair. I know it does not feel like it right now, but we did. I know, Josephine said, her voice muffled against his chest, but it still hurts. Yes, it does. Reverend Whitmore approached them quietly. Come to the church, he said. Sarah will make you some tea, and you can sit somewhere private until you are ready to face the world again. They accepted gratefully, following the Reverend back to the church. Sarah fussed over them, providing tea and warm bread, giving Josephine a chance to compose herself. By the time they left, the sun was setting and Josephine's tears had dried, though the pain still lingered in her eyes. The ride back to the Forrester ranch was quiet. They did not need words. They had each other, and for now, that had to be enough. The months that followed were difficult, but also filled with unexpected joy. Elijah and Josephine threw themselves into their work, building their life one day at a time. Daniel Forrester turned out to be a kind employer, treating them like family rather than just hired help. His wife, Margaret, took Josephine under her wing, teaching her about life on a Wyoming ranch and introducing her to the other women in the area. By December, Josephine realized she was pregnant. She told Elijah on Christmas Eve as they sat by the fire in their little cabin, snow falling softly outside the windows. "We are going to have a baby," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "In late summer, I think. Maybe August." Elijah stared at her, his eyes wide with wonder. "A baby? Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. Margaret helped me figure out the timing." Josephine smiled, the first truly joyful smile she had managed since the confrontation with their fathers. "We are going to be parents, Elijah." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she were made of glass. "This is the best Christmas gift you could have given me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A child, our child who will grow up knowing only love." They spent the winter preparing for the baby. Elijah building a cradle from smooth pine wood while Josephine sewed tiny clothes and blankets. The Foresters were delighted by the news, and the other ranch families welcomed Josephine and Elijah more fully into their community. These were people who understood hardship and new beginnings, and they rallied around the young couple. Spring came, and with it, Josephine's belly began to swell visibly. She continued working as long as she could, but by June, Margaret Forrester insisted she rest more, taking over most of Josephine's household duties at the main house. On a sweltering afternoon in mid-August, the baby came. Margaret and Sarah Whitmore attended the birth while Elijah paced outside the cabin, driven half-mad with worry by Josephine's cries. It seemed to take forever, but finally, just as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound, the thin, furious wail of a newborn baby. Sarah opened the door, her face flushed and smiling. "You have a son, Elijah, a healthy, strong boy, and your wife did beautifully." Elijah pushed past her, his heart in his throat, and found Josephine propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing with a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Elijah approached slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the baby's face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt something break open in his chest. This was his child, his and Josephine's. A brand new person, innocent of all the hatred and violence that had shaped their own lives. "What should we name him?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Josephine had thought about this for months. "I want to name him after my mother," she said. "Her maiden name was Reed. I thought perhaps Reed Young." "Reed Young," Elijah repeated, testing the sound of it. "It is perfect." He sat on the edge of the bed, and Josephine carefully placed the baby in his arms. Elijah looked down at his son, at the tiny perfect fingers and the eyes that were trying so hard to focus on his face, and made a silent promise. This child would never know the bitterness of a blood feud. This child would be raised with love and kindness, not anger and revenge. "Hello, Reed," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." The first year of Reed's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. He was a healthy, happy baby who smiled early and laughed often. Josephine proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, while Elijah discovered that he loved fatherhood more than he had ever imagined possible. They heard nothing from either of their fathers. Elijah had sent a letter to the young ranch when Reed was born, announcing the birth of their son, but he received no reply. Josephine did not even try to contact Thomas Caldwell, knowing it would be futile. "Perhaps they will come around eventually," Margaret Forrester said one day as she watched Josephine playing with Reed in the grass outside the cabin. "Grandchildren have a way of softening even the hardest hearts." "Perhaps," Josephine said, but she did not sound hopeful. When Reed was 15 months old, Daniel Forrester called Elijah into his office. "I am getting too old to manage this whole operation by myself," he said without preamble. "And my son has made it clear he has no interest in ranching. He wants to be a lawyer back east." Forrester shook his head, clearly still baffled by this choice. "I would like to make you a partner, Elijah. You have proven yourself to be hardworking, honest, and good with both animals and people." "What do you say?" Elijah could barely process what he was hearing. "A partner." "Sir, I do not have capital to invest. I am not asking for money. I am asking for your commitment to help me run this place and to eventually take it over when I am too old to do it myself. In exchange, you will own 30% of the ranch immediately, with that percentage increasing as time goes on. Your family will be secure, and you will have something of your own to pass on to your son." Forrester extended his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Elijah shook his hand, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Yes, sir, you will not regret this." "I know I will not. You are a good man, Elijah Young. Your father is a fool for letting you go." That night, Elijah and Josephine celebrated in their little cabin, dancing around the room while Reed clapped his hands and laughed at his silly parents. They were building something real now, something that would last. The blood feud seemed very far away. But the past has a way of catching up with people, no matter how far they run. 2 years after Reed's birth, on a cold October morning, a rider arrived at the Forrester Ranch asking for Elijah Young. The man was travel-stained and exhausted, and Elijah recognized him immediately as one of his father's oldest ranch hands, a man named Samuel who had taught Elijah to rope cattle when he was a boy. "Samuel," Elijah said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I have news from your father's ranch," Samuel said, his voice heavy. "It is not good, Elijah. Your father, he had a stroke 3 weeks ago. He is alive, but he is not well. The doctor says he may not have long." Elijah felt the ground tilt beneath him. "A stroke?" "Yes, he has been asking for you. Keep saying your name over and over. I know there is bad blood between you, but I thought you should know. If you want to see him before the end, you should come soon." Elijah stood frozen, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to dismiss this news, to say that Marcus Young had made his choice when he disowned his son, and now he could face death alone. But another part of him, the part that still remembered being a boy learning to ride at his father's side, ached at the thought of Marcus dying with this rift between them. "I need to talk to my wife," he said finally. "Give me an hour." He found Josephine in the garden behind the cabin, pulling up the last of the summer vegetables while Reed helped by throwing dirt clods at the chickens. When she saw Elijah's face, she immediately stood, brushing soil from her hands. "What is wrong?" He told her about Samuel's news, about his father's illness and his request to see Elijah before he died. Josephine listened quietly, her face thoughtful. "You should go," she said when he finished. "I am not sure I want to. He disowned me, Josephine. He chose the feud over his own son." "I know. But if you do not go, you will regret it for the rest of your life." Josephine took his hands. "I am not saying you need to forgive him or accept his version of events, but you should at least see him, hear what he has to say. Maybe there will be no reconciliation, but at least you will know you tried." Elijah pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Will you come with me? I do not want to face him alone." "Of course I will come. We are a family, Elijah. We face things together." They left the next morning, taking Reed with them since he was still nursing, and Josephine did not want to leave him behind. Samuel rode with them, guiding them back across the Wyoming plains toward the ranches they had fled 3 years earlier. As they approached the Rio Grande, Elijah felt tension building in his chest. He had not seen young land since the night he crossed the river for Josephine. Now he was returning, but not as the prodigal son. As a man with his own family, his own life, who had proven that he did not need his father's approval to survive. They crossed the river at the same place Elijah had that fateful August evening, the water lower now in the fall season. The young ranch house appeared in the distance, and Elijah was struck by how much smaller it looked than he remembered. It had loomed so large in his childhood memories, but now it was just a house, weathered wood and dusty windows, nothing more. Several ranch hands were working in the corrals as they rode up, and they stopped to stare at Elijah. Some nodded respectfully. Others turned away, still loyal to Marcus's rejection of his son. Samuel led them to the house and helped Josephine dismount, taking Reed from her arms while she straightened her skirts. "Your father is in his bedroom upstairs," Samuel said quietly. "The doctor is with him now, but I am sure he will allow you in." Elijah took Josephine's hand, and together they entered the house he had grown up in. It was exactly as he remembered: the same worn furniture, the same paintings on the walls, the same smell of leather and tobacco smoke. It felt like stepping into a memory. The doctor met them at the top of the stairs, a middle-aged man with tired eyes. "You must be Elijah," he said. "Your father has been asking for you constantly. I must warn you, though the stroke has affected his speech and his right side. He may have trouble communicating. Try not to upset him. His heart is weak." "I will be careful," Elijah promised. The doctor stepped aside, and Elijah pushed open the door to his father's bedroom. Marcus Young lay in the bed that had seemed enormous when Elijah was a child, but now looked too small for his father's frame. Marcus had always been a large man, powerful and commanding, but illness had shrunk him. His face was gaunt, his hair completely white now, and his right arm lay useless on the coverlet. When he saw Elijah in the doorway, tears began to run down his weathered cheeks. "Elijah," he said, the words slurred but understandable. "You came." Elijah moved into the room, Josephine close behind him. "Samuel said you wanted to see me." "Yes." Marcus's eyes shifted to Josephine, and for a moment Elijah thought he might order her out of the room. But instead, Marcus just looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Josephine Caldwell." "Josephine Young," she corrected gently. "I have been Josephine Young for 3 years now." "Young," Marcus repeated, as if testing the word. His gaze moved past them to where Samuel stood in the doorway, holding Reed. Is that your boy?" "Yes," Elijah said. "His name is Reed. He is 2.5 years old." "Reed." Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Bring him here. Let me see my grandson." Josephine took Reed from Samuel and carried him to the bedside. Reed, who had never met his grandfather, looked at the old man with curious eyes but no fear. "Hello, Reed," Marcus said softly. "I am your grandfather." Reed considered this information, then pointed at Marcus's white beard. "Fluffy." Despite everything, Elijah felt a smile tug at his lips. "Yes, his beard is very fluffy." Marcus reached out with his left hand, the one that still worked, and Reed grabbed his finger. For a moment, the old man simply stared at this connection, this bridge between him and the grandson he had never met. "I have been a fool," Marcus said finally, his voice broken. "A stubborn, hateful fool. Father, let me speak. I do not have much time, and I need to say this." Marcus's eyes were still on Reed, but his words were directed at Elijah. "I let the feud consume me. I let it become more important than my own son, my own family. And for what? Revenge that has never satisfied, pride that has left me alone and dying." "You do not have to do this now," Elijah said, uncomfortable with the emotion in his father's voice. "Yes, I do. Because I need you to know that I was wrong. Disowning you was the biggest mistake of my life, Elijah. You chose love and life while I chose bitterness and death. You were the wise one, not me." Josephine shifted Reed to her other hip, her own eyes glistening with tears. "Mr. Young, we never wanted to hurt you, I know that. I have always known that, even when I was too proud to admit it." Marcus finally looked directly at Elijah. "Can you forgive me, son? I have no right to ask it, but I am asking anyway. Can you forgive a foolish old man who wasted years he could have spent knowing his son and his grandson?" Elijah felt his throat tighten. All the anger he had carried, all the hurt from being rejected by his father, rose up in him, but so did the memories of childhood, of learning to ride and rope, of his father teaching him the stars and telling him stories around campfires. Marcus Young had been a hard man, shaped by tragedy and bitterness, but he had also been Elijah's father. "I forgive you," Elijah said and meant it. "I wish things had been different, but I forgive you." The relief on Marcus's face was profound. "Thank you. That means more than you know." He paused, gathering strength. "I have changed my will. The ranch is yours, Elijah. Everything I own goes to you and your family. Samuel will help you manage it until you are ready to take over full time. Father, I have a life now, a partnership with Daniel Forrester. Keep it. Run both ranches if you can, or sell this one and use the money to expand Forrester's operation. I do not care. I just want you to have what should have been yours all along." Marcus's grip on Reed's finger tightened slightly. "And I want this boy to know that his grandfather loved him, even if we never got to spend time together. Tell him that, Elijah. When he is old enough to understand, tell him that I was proud to be his grandfather." "I will," Elijah promised, his voice thick. "I will tell him." They stayed with Marcus for 3 more days, during which he rallied slightly, gaining enough strength to sit up in bed and hold Reed for short periods. The little boy, with the unconcerned affection of childhood, took to calling Marcus Grandpa Fluffy, which made the old man laugh for the first time in years. On the 4th day, Marcus passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Elijah sitting beside his bed. It was a quiet death, gentle in a way that seemed at odds with the violence that had defined so much of Marcus's life. But perhaps that was fitting in the end. He had chosen peace over conflict, love over hatred. They buried Marcus Young in the family plot on a hillside overlooking the ranch, beside his brother who had been killed 16 years earlier. Reverend Whitmore traveled from Lusk to perform the service, and a surprising number of people attended: ranch hands, neighbors, townspeople who had known Marcus for decades. Even Daniel Forrester made the journey, standing respectfully with his hat in his hands as they lowered the casket into the ground. As the mourners drifted away after the service, Elijah noticed a lone rider sitting on a horse at the edge of the property, watching from a distance. Even from far away he recognized Thomas Caldwell. Josephine saw him too. She stiffened, her hand tightening on Elijah's arm. "My father," she whispered. "I see him." They watched as Thomas sat motionless for a long moment. Then slowly, he removed his hat and held it over his heart, a gesture of respect for a fallen enemy. He replaced his hat, turned his horse, and rode away without approaching. "He came," Josephine said, wonder in her voice. "He actually came to pay his respects." "Perhaps your father is not as unmovable as we thought," Elijah said. "Perhaps Marcus's death affected him more than he wants to admit." "Perhaps," Josephine agreed, but she did not sound convinced. Elijah spent the next 2 weeks settling his father's affairs with Samuel's help. The ranch was in better shape than he expected, well managed and profitable. Samuel offered to stay on as foreman, and Elijah gratefully accepted. They decided that Elijah and Josephine would remain based at the Forrester Ranch, with Elijah traveling to the Young Ranch once a month to check on operations and make major decisions. It was not a perfect solution, but it worked. Elijah now had 2 sources of income, and the financial security meant he could provide for his family in ways he had never imagined when he first crossed the Rio Grande for love. As they prepared to return to the Forrester ranch, Elijah stood on the porch of the house he grew up in, looking out over young land. So much pain had originated here, so much hatred nurtured and fed. But maybe, with Marcus gone and Elijah in charge, that could change. Maybe the young ranch could become a place of healing instead of bitterness. "Are you ready?" Josephine asked from behind him, Reed in her arms. "Yes," Elijah said, turning to face his family. "Let us go home." 3 years passed in relative peace. Reed grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses and had his father's way with animals. Josephine gave birth to a daughter when Reed was 4, a beautiful little girl they named Clara after Josephine's mother. And then, 2 years after Clara, came another son whom they named Marcus, after the grandfather who had asked for forgiveness in his final days. The young ranch prospered under Samuel's management and Elijah's oversight. The Forrester Ranch, now the Forrester Young Ranch after Daniel made Elijah a full partner, expanded significantly. Life was good, full of hard work and family joy, but Josephine still grieved the loss of her own family. She never spoke of it directly, but Elijah could see the sadness in her eyes sometimes, particularly on the children's birthdays or holidays, when she must have been thinking about her father and brothers who knew nothing about Reed, Clara, or Marcus. On a spring morning in 1885, 7 years after they had first run away together, a rider arrived at their cabin with a message. The envelope was addressed to Josephine in handwriting she recognized immediately as her father's. She opened it with shaking hands, Elijah reading over her shoulder. "Josephine, your brother James was thrown from his horse last week. He broke his back and the doctor says he will not walk again. He is asking for you. I know I have no right to request this after how I treated you, but he is your brother and he wants to see you. If you choose to come, you would be welcome. So would your husband and your children. I hear you have 3 now. I would like to meet them if you will allow it. Your father, Thomas Caldwell." Josephine read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. "He wants me to come home," she whispered. "After all these years, he finally wants me to come home. Do you want to go?" Elijah asked gently. "Yes," Josephine said. "I want my children to know their grandfather and their uncles. I want to make peace with my family if that is possible." "But Elijah, after everything that happened, we will go together," Elijah said firmly. "If Thomas Caldwell truly wants to make peace, then we will give him that chance. And if he is just luring us there to cause trouble, well, we will face that together too." They made the journey to the Caldwell Ranch a week later, all 5 of them. Reed, now 7, was old enough to understand that this was important, but not quite why. Clara, at 3, was just excited for an adventure. Baby Marcus, only 8 months old, slept in a sling against Josephine's chest. As they crossed the Rio Grande onto Caldwell land, Elijah felt an eerie sense of déjà vu. This was where it had all started, with him crossing this river to reach Josephine. Now he was crossing it again, but this time with permission, with Josephine beside him as his wife, with their children as proof of the life they had built together. The Caldwell ranch house looked much as Elijah remembered from his one brief glimpse of it years ago, large and imposing, painted white with a wide porch. As they approached, the front door opened, and Thomas Caldwell stepped out. He had aged significantly in 7 years. His hair, which had been salt and pepper, was now completely white, and his shoulders had a stoop they had not had before. But his eyes, when they fixed on Josephine, were bright with emotion. "Josephine," he said, his voice rough. "You came." Josephine dismounted and stood before her father, separated by 7 years of silence and pain. "You asked me to come. Of course I came. James is my brother. He is inside, resting. The doctor gave him laudanum for the pain so he drifts in and out, but he will want to see you." Thomas's eyes moved to the children. "Are these my grandchildren?" "Yes." Josephine beckoned Reed forward. "This is Reed, our oldest. He is 7. And this is Clara, who is 3. And the baby is Marcus." Thomas's eyes widened slightly at the name. "You named your son after Marcus Young." "He was Elijah's father," Josephine said simply. "And he asked for forgiveness before he died. It seemed right to honor that." Thomas was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then he looked at Elijah for the first time, really looked at him, not with hatred but with assessment. "You have taken good care of my daughter," he said. "I can see that she is happy." "I have tried, sir," Elijah replied. "She is my whole world, and the children, they are healthy, well provided for." "Yes, sir, we have been fortunate. Business has been good." Thomas nodded slowly. Then, to Elijah's complete shock, he extended his hand. "Thank you for keeping her safe and happy. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness after how I treated both of you, but I am asking anyway. I was wrong to let the feud come between me and my daughter. Marcus's death made me realize that life is too short to waste on hatred." Elijah shook his hand, feeling the strength still in the old man's grip. "I forgive you, Mr. Caldwell. For Josephine's sake, and for our children, I forgive you. Call me Thomas," he said. "We are family now, after all." They spent 2 weeks at the Caldwell ranch. James, Josephine's younger brother, was indeed badly injured, but his spirits lifted considerably when he saw his sister. He was 22 now, and he remembered Josephine leaving, remembered his father's rage and grief. Seeing her again, seeing that she had built a good life, seemed to bring him peace. "I am glad you found happiness," he told her one afternoon as she sat beside his bed. "Even if it meant leaving us. You deserve to be happy, Joe." The other brother, William, was more reserved, but even he eventually warmed to Josephine and her family. Reed and Clara charmed everyone with their energy and innocence, and even baby Marcus did his part by being generally cheerful and easy. One evening, after the children were asleep, Elijah and Josephine sat on the porch with Thomas Caldwell, watching the sun set over the Texas plains. "I owe you both an apology," Thomas said without preamble. "I let pride and stubbornness cost me 7 years with my daughter, and any chance to know my grandchildren when they were small. Marcus Young was wise enough to ask for forgiveness before he died. I am asking now, while I still have time." "You already have my forgiveness, Father," Josephine said softly. "I gave it the moment I read your letter." "Mine too," Elijah added. "The feud has taken enough from all of us. It is time to let it die." Thomas nodded, his eyes distant. "Marcus and I were friends once, did you know that? When we were young men, before I shot his brother. We used to help each other during roundups, share supplies during hard winters. Then there was a dispute over water rights and tempers flared, and suddenly we were enemies. His brother came at me with a knife one night when I was checking fence line, and I shot him. It was self-defense, but Marcus never believed that. The feud grew from there, fed by pride and pain until it consumed everything." He turned to look at Elijah and Josephine. "You two did what Marcus and I should have done decades ago. You chose love over hate, peace over revenge. You were braver than either of us ever were." "We just wanted to be together," Josephine said. "We never set out to be brave." "That is what makes it true bravery," Thomas replied. "You did the right thing simply because it was right, not for glory or recognition. Your children will grow up knowing both sides of their family, not as enemies but as kin. That is a gift, Josephine. One Marcus and I never gave our own children." As the weeks turned into months, the relationship between the Caldwell and Young families continued to heal. Thomas visited their ranch several times, getting to know his grandchildren better. James's younger brother, William, even came to work as a ranch hand for Elijah, wanting to learn a different way of doing things and perhaps escape the shadow of the feud. The biggest surprise came 2 years later, when James Caldwell, despite his injury and the doctor's dire predictions, married a schoolteacher from Lusk named Catherine Henderson, the granddaughter of the woman who ran the general store. Catherine was patient and kind, and she did not mind that James would never walk again. She loved him for his humor and his gentleness, and together they adapted their life to his limitations. At their wedding, held at the Caldwell Ranch, Elijah stood as one of James's groomsmen, a young standing up for a Caldwell, something that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Josephine cried through the entire ceremony, overcome with joy that her family was not only reunited but growing. Time continued its steady march. Reed grew tall and serious, showing an early talent for business that made Elijah suspect he would be the one to truly expand their ranching operation into something even larger. Clara became a spirited, independent girl who declared at age 8 that she was going to be a rancher herself someday, not just a rancher's wife. Marcus, the youngest, was gentle and thoughtful, more interested in books than horses, though he loved his family's work. And then, when Reed was 16 and Josephine thought her childbearing days were long behind her, she found herself pregnant again. This fourth child was a complete surprise, a daughter they named Sarah after Sarah Whitmore, who had been so kind to them in those early desperate days. Thomas Caldwell lived to meet Sarah, holding her in his arms when she was just 3 days old. 4 grandchildren, he marveled. Marcus would be envious. He only got to meet one before he died. He would have loved them all, Elijah said. Just as you love them. I do, Thomas admitted. More than I ever expected to love anything again after your mother died, Josephine. These children have given me a reason to smile again. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years after Sarah's birth, at the age of 78. They buried him on Caldwell land, next to his wife, and both the Youngs and the Caldwells mourned together. The feud that had defined 2 families for more than 2 decades was truly over, buried with the men who had started it. At Thomas's funeral, Elijah stood with his arm around Josephine, watching as their children and Josephine's brothers paid their respects. Reed, now 18 and almost a man, stood particularly tall, his young face solemn with the weight of family history. "We did it," Josephine whispered to Elijah. "We ended it. The feud is truly over." "Yes," Elijah agreed. "We chose love and we won." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Reed married at 22, bringing home a bride named Emma who fit seamlessly into the family. Clara, true to her word, became a rancher, working alongside her father and brother, and eventually marrying one of the ranch hands, a quiet man named Joseph who adored her fierce independence. Marcus went east to college, studying law, but he came home every summer and eventually returned permanently to help manage the legal and business aspects of the now considerable ranching empire the family had built. He married a schoolteacher, as his Uncle James had, and they had 3 daughters who brought even more life to the family gatherings. Young Sarah, the surprise baby, grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's grace and her father's kindness. She married at 19, and her wedding was the largest celebration the family had ever held, with Caldwells and Youngs and Forresters all mixing together, the old divisions meaningless to the younger generation. Elijah and Josephine watched their children and grandchildren multiply, creating a family tree that bore fruit neither of them had ever imagined when they first met in Henderson's general store all those years ago. They had 16 grandchildren between their 4 children, And by the time Elijah was 65, they had started accumulating great-grandchildren as well. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a party at the main ranch house, now expanded and modernized but still the same cabin where they had started their life together. Reed gave a toast, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "My parents did something remarkable," he said, raising his glass. "They looked at a world built on hatred and division, and they chose to build something different. They chose love over loyalty to a pointless feud. They chose each other over the approval of their families. And because of that choice, all of us are here today, Youngs and Caldwells and Forresters and Hendersons, all family, all together. They gave us the gift of peace and love, and we owe them everything." The crowd cheered, and Elijah felt Josephine's hand slip into his, their fingers interlacing exactly as they had 1,000 times before. He looked at her and saw the young woman who had stood in a general store 30 years ago, who had risked everything to be with him, who had crossed rivers and defied fathers and built a life from nothing but love and determination. "I would do it all again," he said to her, leaning close so only she could hear. "Every hard moment, every sacrifice, I would cross that river 1,000 times for you, Josephine. And I would run away with you 1,000 times," she replied, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "You are my home, Elijah. You always have been." As the party continued around them, as their children and grandchildren laughed and danced and celebrated, Elijah and Josephine sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over land that had once been divided by hate but was now united by love. The Rio Grande still flowed in the distance, but it was no longer a barrier. It was just a river, beautiful and neutral, its waters running toward the sea. They had done what they set out to do, though they had never articulated it as a goal. They had ended a blood feud. They had built a family based on love rather than inherited anger. They had proven that one cowboy crossing a river for the woman he loved could change everything. Years later, when Elijah was 72 and Josephine was 69, they sat on that same porch on a warm summer evening. Reed now ran most of the ranching operations, and their grandchildren were starting to take on more responsibility. Clara's oldest son had just been made foreman of the North Pasture. Marcus's middle daughter was studying to be a lawyer like her father. Life went on generation to generation, each one more distant from the feud that had almost prevented any of them from existing. "Do you ever regret it?" Elijah asked Josephine, though he knew the answer. He just liked hearing her say it. "Not for a single moment," she replied, exactly as he knew she would. "You gave me everything that matters: love, children, a life full of meaning. What is there to regret?" "Nothing," Elijah agreed. "Absolutely nothing." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, their hands clasped together. Two people who had dared to love across a divide and had created something beautiful in the process. The past was behind them, forgiven and learned from. The future was ahead, full of grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would never know the weight of a blood feud. And the present was this moment, this evening, this porch, this hand in his hand, this woman beside him who had always been worth crossing any river, defying any father, breaking any rule. Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder, and Elijah wrapped his arm around her, and they watched the night settle over the land they had built together, the family they had created, the peace they had won. It was, Elijah thought, exactly how a love story should end, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with quiet contentment, with the knowledge that they had chosen right all those years ago when they chose each other. The feud was over. Love had won. And they had lived to see the fruits of that victory spread across generations, blessing dozens of lives that might never have existed if a cowboy had not once crossed a river for the woman he loved. As full darkness fell, and the crickets began their evening song, Josephine squeezed Elijah's hand. "Tell me again about the night you crossed the Rio Grande," she said, though she had heard the story 100 times. "Which time?" Elijah teased. "The night I crossed to find you or the night we crossed together?" "Both. Tell me both." So Elijah did, his voice soft in the darkness, telling the story of two young people who had dared to defy hatred and build love in its place. And as he talked, he could hear grandchildren somewhere in the house, laughing and playing, living proof that their story had not ended with crossing a river. It had only just begun. When he finished the story, Josephine was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We were so young, so foolish. We had no idea what we were getting into." "Would you have done it differently if you had known?" Elijah asked. "Not a thing," Josephine said firmly. "Not a single thing." "Good," Elijah said and kissed her temple. "Neither would I." They sat together until the night grew cool, and their daughter Clara came looking for them, insisting they come inside before they caught cold. They went, hand in hand, into the house full of family and warmth and love, leaving the porch empty but not lonely. Outside, the Rio Grande continued flowing in the darkness, bearing no grudges, remembering no feuds, just doing what rivers do, moving forward, always forward, toward something larger than itself. And in a small way, that was what Elijah and Josephine had done too. They had moved forward, toward something larger than their individual lives, larger even than their love. They had moved toward peace, toward healing, toward a future where their children's children would never know the bitterness that had poisoned their father's generation. They had crossed the river and they had made it to the other side, together, always together. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The cowboy had crossed the river for her, and she had been worth every step.